Imagine a city of canals and causeways, grand temples piercing the sky, and bustling markets teeming with life. This was Tenochtitlan, the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, a jewel floating on Lake Texcoco. At the dawn of the 16th century, this empire controlled vast territories, commanding tribute from millions. It was a civilization at the zenith of its power. Yet, in just 2 short years, it would all come crashing down, brought to ruin by a force of just a few hundred outsiders. How did this happen? How did Hernán Cortés and his small band of Spanish conquistadors manage to topple one of the most powerful empires in the Americas? This is the story of a clash of worlds, of ambition, betrayal, and a tragedy that would reshape a continent forever. Our story begins in 1519, when Hernán Cortés lands on the coast of what is now Mexico. His expedition was technically unauthorized, a bold gamble for gold, glory, and God. With him were about 600 men, a handful of horses, some primitive firearms called harquebuses, and a few cannons. Against the might of the Aztec military, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, this should have been a suicide mission. But Cortés was a master of strategy and manipulation. One of his first and most audacious moves was to scuttle his own ships, leaving his men with no option for retreat. It was conquer or die. As Cortés and his men marched inland, they encountered a complex political landscape. The Aztec Empire wasn't a monolithic happy family. It was a coalition of city-states, held together by force, with Tenochtitlan at its center. Many of the subject peoples resented the Aztecs and the heavy tribute they demanded, which often included human sacrifices. Cortés quickly recognized this weakness. He wasn't just facing an empire, he was stepping into a web of local rivalries. It was here that he gained his 2 most crucial assets. First, a shipwrecked Spanish priest who had learned a local Mayan dialect, and second, a woman who would change the course of history, Malintzin, later known as La Malinche. Malintzin was a Nahua woman who had been sold into slavery and spoke both a Mayan dialect and the Aztec language, Nahuatl. She became Cortés' indispensable interpreter, strategist, and cultural advisor. With her help, Cortés could communicate, negotiate, and understand the intricate politics of the region. He learned of the widespread discontent with Aztec rule and began to forge alliances. His most important allies were the Tlaxcalans, fierce rivals of the Aztecs who had resisted their domination for decades. After a series of fierce battles, the Tlaxcalans, seeing a potential partner to overthrow their old enemy, joined forces with the Spanish. Suddenly, Cortés' small army was bolstered by thousands of elite indigenous warriors. News of these strange, pale-skinned men eventually reached the Aztec Emperor, Montezuma II. Montezuma was a powerful but deeply superstitious ruler. He was troubled by a series of ominous portents that had recently occurred, and the arrival of these foreigners fit disturbingly well with ancient prophecies about the return of the god Quetzalcoatl. Was Cortés a god, a divine envoy, or just a foreign invader? Uncertainty paralyzed the Aztec leadership. Instead of crushing the small Spanish force on the coast, Montezuma sent them lavish gifts of gold and precious metals, hoping to appease them and persuade them to leave. But for the gold-hungry conquistadors, these gifts had the opposite effect. They were proof of the immense wealth that lay ahead, fueling their determination to reach the capital. In November 1519, Cortés and his army, now accompanied by thousands of Tlaxcalan allies, arrived at the gates of Tenochtitlan. What they saw astounded them. A city larger than any in Spain, with a population of over 200,000, connected to the mainland by 3 massive causeways. It was a marvel of engineering and artistry. Instead of being met with resistance, they were welcomed. In a decision that has been debated by historians for centuries, Montezuma invited Cortés and his men into the heart of his city. He housed them in a lavish palace and treated them as honored guests. Why? Perhaps he still believed they were divine, or perhaps he was following a classic Aztec strategy: lure your enemies into a trap. Whatever the reason, it would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Inside the city, the Spaniards' initial awe quickly turned to anxiety. They were trapped on an island, vastly outnumbered, surrounded by a warrior society they did not understand. Fearing for their safety, Cortés made another bold move. He took Montezuma hostage. By placing the emperor under house arrest within his own palace, Cortés effectively seized control of the Aztec Empire without firing a single shot. For months, an uneasy calm settled over the city, with Cortés ruling through his captive emperor. But this fragile peace was shattered when Cortés had to leave the city to deal with a rival Spanish force sent to arrest him. He left his hot-headed subordinate, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge. During a major religious festival, Alvarado, fearing an uprising, ordered a preemptive massacre of thousands of unarmed Aztec nobles and priests. The city erupted in fury. When Cortés returned, he found Tenochtitlan in open revolt. The Aztecs, now led by Montezuma's brother, Cuitlahuac, laid siege to the palace, where the Spanish were barricaded. In a desperate attempt to quell the violence, Cortés forced Montezuma to appear before his people, but they stoned their former leader, who died shortly after, either from his injuries or at the hands of the Spanish. With their puppet emperor gone, the Spaniards' situation was hopeless. On a rainy night in June 1520, known as La Noche Trestor, the Night of Sorrows, they attempted a desperate escape from the city. Weighed down by stolen gold, they were ambushed on the causeways. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Hundreds of Spaniards and thousands of their Tlaxcalan allies were killed or drowned. Cortés himself barely escaped with his life. It was a catastrophic defeat. Beaten and broken, the survivors limped back to the safety of Tlaxcala. It seemed the Aztec Empire had prevailed, but the Spanish had left behind a silent, invisible ally, more deadly than any cannon: smallpox. The disease, to which the indigenous peoples had no immunity, had been introduced to the mainland by a member of the Spanish expedition. It now swept through the Aztec population like wildfire. It killed indiscriminately, wiping out an estimated 40% of the population of central Mexico within a year. Among its victims was the new emperor, Cuitlahuac. The disease didn't just decimate the Aztec army, it shattered their morale. Their gods seemed powerless against this strange pestilence, while the Spanish, who were largely immune, appeared protected. While the Aztecs were being ravaged by disease, Cortés was regrouping. In Tlaxcala, he built a new fleet of small ships, designed to be carried in pieces over the mountains and reassembled on the shores of Lake Texcoco, with fresh reinforcements from the coast and a massive army of indigenous allies. Now numbering in the tens of thousands, he returned to Tenochtitlan in 1521. This time, there would be no welcome. The new Aztec emperor, the young and courageous Cuauhtémoc, was determined to fight to the death. Cortés laid siege to the city. His newly built ships blockaded the causeways, cutting off all food and water. For 93 days, the Aztecs endured unimaginable suffering. They faced starvation, thirst, and the unrelenting onslaught of smallpox, all while fighting off daily attacks from the Spanish and their allies. The fighting was ferocious, street by street, house by house. The canals ran red with blood. The once magnificent city was systematically destroyed. Finally, on August 13, 1521, with the last of its defenders cornered and starving, Tenochtitlan fell. Cuauhtémoc was captured, and the resistance was over. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not simply a story of 600 Spaniards conquering millions. It was a complex catastrophe, driven by a perfect storm of factors. Spanish steel, guns, and horses provided a tactical advantage, but they were not the decisive element. Cortés' strategic genius and ruthless ambition were key, as was his ability to exploit the internal divisions within the empire and rally tens of thousands of indigenous allies to his cause. The indecisiveness and tragic miscalculations of Montezuma played a crucial role. The cultural interpretation and strategic guidance of Malintzin were indispensable, but perhaps the most powerful weapon of all was one the Spanish didn't even know they had: the devastating smallpox virus that crippled the Aztec people from within. The conquest was a turning point in world history. It marked the end of the Aztec civilization and the beginning of 300 years of Spanish rule in Mexico. On the ruins of the magnificent Tenochtitlan, the Spanish built Mexico City, paving over the temples and canals, burying one world to create another. It's a story filled with incredible bravery and unspeakable cruelty on all sides, a tragic clash of cultures that laid the foundation for the modern nations of Latin America. The echoes of this collision, of courts in Montezuma, of Tenochtitlan's fall, can still be felt today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into one of history's most dramatic moments. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Figures and Moments for more explorations of the past. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.